Hi, welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight our guest is Melinda Selmys. She's going to speak about her journey out of a gay lifestyle, out of the life of homosexuality, and into her new life as a Catholic and a wife, a mother, and an author, a columnist, a speaker, and a very bright person. I spoke to her this afternoon, and great insights, and she'll be speaking about these issues in our culture today and new approaches to evangelization and how to address the topic. Sadly, Doug couldn't be here today, but joyfully, Father Anthony is. So welcome, Father Anthony.
Oh, thank you, Father.
Doug had a prior engagement that he had to be at. We have a nice crowd here tonight, full audience.
Well, Doug would always say, Father Mark's away on a covert mission, so right. Doug's away on a covert mission.
Right, he's at a conference, I think, so going out there to evangelize this culture. I thought this opening segment we'd speak a little bit about Lent. We're somewhere around the halfway mark. And I know this past Sunday we had the meditation, they had the gospel, and the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. And our Holy Father said in an Angelus address, I just thought I'd read this one paragraph that struck me. He said, each one of us can identify himself with the Samaritan woman. Jesus is waiting for us, especially in this season of Lent, to speak to our hearts, to my heart. Let us pause a moment in silence, in our room, or in our church, or in a separate place. Let us listen to his voice, which tells us, if you knew the gift of God. May the Virgin Mary help us not to miss this appointment on which our true happiness depends. If we knew the gift of God, right? He promises the woman that he wants to give her living water, and this living water becomes a spring welling up within us, that gift of the Holy Spirit. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at Lent, as a time of pause, a time of conversion, repentance, and to make some space for God to receive the gifts that he wants to give us.
Yeah, and like the Holy Father says, Jesus comes to where we are. Mm-hmm. I think it's a beautiful message of how the church evangelizes and how the individual is to evangelize. That Christ knows where to find the woman, and he knows how to speak to her, and then doesn't put her, expose her, put her on the spot, but invites her to come where he is. He doesn't stay there, but he takes her to that new height. And that's what the church does wherever she is going with the mission or the message of the gospel, to invite people, mm-hmm. To come to that higher place with Christ.
And, one thing too I've noticed about the liturgical seasons, they are a time of grace, right? And the church wants us to be converted, and especially focus on that in this quietness and being raised to a higher place. So we're going to receive the grace for that. She pours out her graces upon us during this time, and so we need to make the time to ask for those graces, to examine our life, and as he says, to pause a moment in silence. God is so generous with us, and we can give him as much as we can, obviously, but even just moments, he can work with us.
And the scripture passages are always about like these great witnesses of conversion, like the prodigal son, and just even the challenge of Christ telling us to be perfect like his heavenly Father is perfect. And they're beautiful readings, and yet so challenging that we have to dig deep and really change, mm-hmm. Really be converted.
Mm-hmm. And the church during Lent, right, offers traditional forms of this conversion to express that, to foster, right, of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. When we speak about fasting, that can be intimidating sometimes. What do you tell people about fasting?
Bread and water for 40 days.
I noticed that about you. Late at night, sneaking that bread and water in the middle of the night.
Yeah, every hour. And I think that the challenge, a lot of times the enemy likes to play on our minds that to do any form of penance, we're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to die if we're not eating. We're going to die if we do anything sacrificial. It's just not true. And yet, what the real purpose is,
mm-hmm.
That the purpose is that detachment from sin and the attachment to God,
right.
To live without the things of this world so that we can fix our attention on union with Him.
Right. And one of the forms of almsgiving, too, I think, it could also be like our time, right, and our energies.
Charity.
Charity, works of charity, just paying attention to others in our life, giving them some time. It's
interesting. I just met someone earlier today who said, Father, as Lent began, I left Mass and I said, God, I want to serve others. You know, help me during this Lenten season to have an opportunity to serve other people. And she said, now the first week of Lent, you know, that nothing came along. But she said the second week of Lent, every single day, there was something there. Someone was asking for help. She hit the weekend and she said, Lord, I need a break. I can't take it anymore. But how God responds to give us the opportunity.
I think that's a great point. You know, I've sometimes prayed for that myself, an opportunity or something. And God seemed like He always answers that prayer. And it's such a mature spirituality, you know, to be able to, and even just a psychology on a natural level, to be able to give of ourselves, you know, to look for opportunities, to seek them, to serve others. And they can't just be in small ways, but I think a big shift can happen in ourselves, you know, instead of being selfish and trying to accumulate more and more, having more, or whatever, to see how we can give. And I like to look at these practices, too, as kind of just quieting the old man, the interior man, our fallen Adam within us, to quiet the ego, right? To make some room for God.
Right. Yeah. And the ability to listen to Him.
Listen. What about prayer? What would you recommend to people about prayer? We've got about 30 seconds here.
Pray.
Any tips on that?
I think a lot of times we, especially for families, we can get sidetracked with the busyness of the year. And Lent is a great opportunity to refocus on what we want to do and what in our hearts we know we should do as individuals or as a family, to set apart that time for prayer. Even if it's praying a decade of the Rosary with young children, praying the Rosary as a family, going to Mass an extra day during the week. I think those are beautiful things, and definitely getting to confession.
Okay. Well, we're going to be back with Melinda Selmys, and tonight we are speaking about a topic that's adult in nature, about sexuality and things, so it might not be appropriate for our younger viewers, but it'll be a great show, so don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. Hi, welcome to Life on the Rock. Tonight our guest is Melinda Selmys, and we'll be speaking about homosexuality. Melinda, welcome to the show. And maybe we could start by, if you could give us your story. You've written about it extensively and spoken about it. Could you, tell us all your story?
Okay, I'll try to sort of do this in a nutshell. Basically, when I was, sort of around about 12, 13 years old, which is sort of the normal age for this to happen. I know that'll probably shock half of the audience, but I, sort of started to question whether I was straight or not, because most of the other girls that I was surrounded by were going like, oh, he's so cute, oh, gaga, about all the boys. And I looked at the boys and I couldn't care less. But I had a very, very intense sort of emotional crush on my female best friend. And that sort of developed into a sexual relationship that went on for probably around about 7 years. And then, during that time, I did the traditional, oh, well, maybe I'm not really a lesbian, maybe I'm bi, whatever sort of waffling back and forward thing. I tried to date boys on the side, and it didn't work very well and had disastrous results in several cases. And eventually I said, okay, that's enough of this. I've been trying to have my cake and eat it too, and to try to be everything, and I'm not. And I said, I'm going to adopt a lesbian identity. I'm going to come out of the closet, and I'm not going to sit on the back, in sort of the background of the culture war. I'll get out there and join the fray. And it was sort of embarrassing because about 3 months after I came out of the closet, I converted to Catholicism, and then I had to tell everybody, oh no, I'm going to be a Catholic now.
How old were you then?
18, 19,
okay.
somewhere. Yeah, all this happened while I was still sort of in those teenage years. But yes, I became a Catholic. I assumed, because it's sort of the party line, that since I was gay, that was going to mean I was going to live a chaste life, and I was sort of a very ideological, rationalistic type of person. So I was like, okay, that's fine, we can do that. And then, very much to my surprise, I fell in love and got married, and now I'm pregnant with my 6th kid. Which, I don't want to give anybody the impression that that's the happy story outcome that everybody who makes that kind of a decision is going to get. It's just, that's how God happened to decide things were going to work for me. So, so that's basically the very condensed nutshell version of the.
And some of the big things that led to your conversion, how would you describe that? Because you were an atheist, right? A rationalist and a feminist, right?
I was, yes, I was a radical feminist. I was heavily into the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre, and I was sort of trying to take Immanuel Kant's rationalist ethics and sort of come up with a more liberal version of those, because Kant's a little bit hardline and Prussian. But basically, I got in a big argument with a friend of mine who was practicing to become the successor of one of North America's foremost druids. And the argument was basically he was sort of experimenting with Buddhist anti-rationalism, and I was the big champion of enlightenment, hyper-rationalism, and reason taking the place of God. And we fought for a long time, and it was sort of a friendly way over.
It's not your typical conversion story.
No, no, we drank a lot of cherry brandy and argued about whether God existed or not, and or whether the supernatural or some sort of spirituality existed. He wasn't necessarily going to use the word God either. And then at the end of the argument, it was sort of unsettled, but he said, I've got this book by this monk, Thomas Merton, and obviously I don't expect you to convert to Catholicism, but I think that you'd be able to really relate to the way that he sees things. So he gave me a copy of Seven Storey Mountain, and I took it home and read it. He also gave me a Zen koan, which is a puzzle that's supposed to break your rational perceptions of the world. It didn't completely, obviously, destroy my sense of reason, but it did. There's a way in which reason can become diseased, where you stop relating to the real world and you sort of only relate to these very abstract analytical concepts. So it did break that. And I was sort of groping around going like, oh my goodness, you can't do everything by pure reason alone, let alone my own little reason. What am I going to do? And so I read Thomas Merton's book, and at the end of it I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go back to this God question that I thought I'd settled when I was 13. It looks like he might exist after all. And I wasn't especially excited by the prospect at first, but I figured, if you were going to be authentic and follow, the train of the argument wherever it went, and not try to delude yourself based on what you necessarily wanted, that I'd better look at this seriously. And the experiment that I set up for myself was to pray several times a day and say, all right, God, if you're out there and you exist, show me who you are and what you want me to do. And I figured, if there was a God and he had any interest in human affairs, then as long as I was actually, reasonably open and persevering in that, he would eventually get around to answering me. And so sort of then, over the course of a couple of months, it became more and more, I went from that initial sort of like, God, to much more of a feeling like, oh, there's a creator, there's an order to the universe, and I'm really grateful for that. And then from there, slowly to actually to Mary first. I had a very strong feeling of a feminine presence, which I was relieved by. I was like, oh, good, a goddess, we're all right. But as I got to know her, it was like, I am the Virgin Mother, and it's like, oh, no, not that. And then at that point, I said, okay, well, if...
How did you get to know her? What did you... Like praying the rosary? Or?
No, the rosary was way out. I was hoping it was ISIS. So, no, just sort of, through prayer, and you get a sense of, it's not like you hear the voice coming down, physically, but you do get a sense that there's another personality that you're interacting with, and that, through a glass darkly, you are coming to know that person. And as I came to know her, obviously, we all know, Mary shows the way to Jesus is sort of the way it goes. And I guess, as that happened, I wanted prayers that I could say to this woman. And so at that point, then I went out and I learned the rosary. And there was a point when I was kneeling in the chapel at the university where I was attending, and saying all of the prayers that I knew, and going back to a lot of things that I remembered from growing up as an Anglican. And I got to the end of everything I knew, and the only prayer that was left was the Confiteor, I believe, and.
Oh, the credo.
Yeah, or not yes, you're right, the credo, not the Confiteor. So I said, okay, I believe in God, the Father, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and that was fine. And I believe in Jesus Christ, am I sure? And I was like, okay, what am I doing here? Am I actually saying that I believe in this? And I realized, this is where I've come to, this is where, I've said I'm open to whatever. This is where I've arrived. So at that point, I realized I did have to become a Catholic, because otherwise I'd be intellectually dishonest, and Sartre would be disappointed with me.
All right. Well, since that time, I guess. Well, that was into your marriage, right? And
no. This is well before. I was still. I had actually the first thing I did when I sort of made that decision that yes, I was going to become a Catholic, was I went home and I called my girlfriend and said, we have to break this up because I'm going to be a Catholic. And she was, at first she said, well, couldn't we sort of have a relationship where we're still together, but we don't do anything that's contrary to your faith? And I said, let's be realistic here. We both know that that's not going to work out. That's just drawing this out for months and making it really painful and ugly. Right. And she agreed that was true. And so we remained friends for a while, but that was sort of where that was at the time.
Now your work today, your wife and mother, of course, but outside of that, you're also a speaker and an author. Can you tell us about some of your speaking engagements?
Well, the most interesting was I spoke at the Edith Stein conference at Notre Dame. And that the interest there was, there's a tremendous amount of, I guess, of fear within the gay community of anybody who's kind of left that. And I mean, there's good reasons for a lot of that. There's a tendency to sort of get, the good little ex-gay person comes up on stage and they get introduced by the sort of the hellfire preacher, and and they say, "Oh yes, you can change your sexuality," and then they flee the stage as quickly as possible before someone throws tomatoes. But I think especially within the Protestant world, because there's very little understanding of the calling to celibate chastity, there's a huge amount of pressure for it to be, you have to change your sexual orientation. Or homosexuality is a disease, a psychological disease that can be cured. And there's been a tremendous amount of very, very harmful stuff that's been done to gay people especially, but lesbians as well, over the last century in terms of trying to cure homosexuality. So there's sort of an understandable fear reaction within the gay community. So there was a lot of that tension, especially at Notre Dame, because it's a university setting, and they thought that I was going to stand up and I don't know, reintroduce the Clockwork Orange style brain experiments,
Right.
which obviously wasn't what I was there for. But
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with some of the most frequently asked questions that you're asked at these kinds of events. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a moment. Hi, welcome back to Life on the Rock. Our guest tonight is Melinda Selmys. Now, Melinda, you had given me some questions that in your talks and work that you often get. And the first one from young people, first one is, what should a Catholic teenager do if they find that they have same-sex attractions?
well, I think probably the first thing that anybody sort of has to deal with when you discover this is that there's kind of a fear of, oh, okay, does this mean that I am gay? And there's a tremendous amount of pressure because of the way that that this whole issue is within this culture, to think, I have to make a decision. Do I have a gay identity? Am I going to be living a life of permanent self-denial and repression if I don't act on this? And for a Catholic, that becomes complicated again by, does this mean I'm going to lose my faith? Does this mean I'm going to lose the approval of my family? And I think the first thing that you have to understand is that temptation is going to come to everybody. It's going to come in some form or another. And you need to be realistic about that. And that's hard to do when you're scared. But I think having somebody who, if you can get in touch with a priest or with, with somebody who's sort of been through this before you, who's older and who knows, who's able to help you to work through that sort of thing, that's tremendously helpful. The other thing is, to recognize that as good as sexuality is, it's not the be-all and end-all of human existence. And you may find that, at the same time as you have attractions towards members of your own sex, that you also have some attractions to members of the opposite sex. That's extremely common. And, there's things that you can do to work on nurturing that if you do want to become married, to have a family. There's also, I have a very dear friend who sort of came through the same sort of situation as I did, and he ended up discerning a vocation to a religious order, and is, he has a very good life. He's very happy. He's very fulfilled. I think to understand that, there are going to be options, and that there is going to be, a meaning and a purpose, and things will work themselves out if you persevere in making God sort of the center of things and wrestle with everything in relation to Him. The other thing is to, a lot of people will drive themselves nuts trying to pray the gay away, or thinking that unless I can somehow get rid of these feelings, unless I can somehow get rid of these temptations, my life is over. And what you end up with is a very deep conflict that can only result either in a very sort of neurotic, self-hating relationship that you can perpetuate that for as long as you like, or it's going to result in you saying, I give up. If God expects this of me, he hates me, and I can't believe that, so either I'm going to become an atheist or I'm just going to go join the gay community. And I think to be realistic about the fact, that you might have these feelings for your entire life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't love you, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't live your calling to chastity in any of a number of different ways.
Right, and I mean, the church's teaching, of course, is that everyone's made in the image and likeness of God, and like you said, some might be inclined to have certain temptations. Temptation's not sin. We're not permitted to act out on, like a disordered desire, but certainly we never lose that dignity as being a child of God. So we're more than our sexual attraction. I guess that's one way to...
Well, and it's going to happen to everybody. I think there's a lot of feeling amongst people who have especially strong same-sex attractions that they're being put through a ringer that everybody else isn't being put through. Everybody at some point in their life is going to face a really serious struggle with an overwhelming temptation that seems like I'm going to die if I don't give in to this.
Right.
And that's just a universal human experience. Most people sort of try to keep that in the closet as much as possible because it's painful to talk about. But I think, if you know that that's true, that can be comforting in a sense, because it's like, okay.
We all have a fallen human nature. We all have predominant faults and struggles, right? So, how about the second one? What should family members do if someone in the family comes out?
Well, I think the story I would look at here is the story of the prodigal son. And what does the father do? Because he does something that's really quite counterintuitive, rather. His son comes to him and he says, look, I'm sick of sitting around here waiting for you to kick the bucket. Give me my money. I'm going to go squander it in the city.
The big city.
And you would expect the father to say, are you crazy? Get back out there in the field with your brother, do your work, behave yourself, in good time it will come to you. But the father, I think, sees that there's a decision here that the son has made. He's going to do this. It's a question of whether he's going to do it, by first kicking his father in the teeth and then, running off and enjoying himself, or whether he's going to do it still having some sort of a relationship with the father. And so the father says, all right, okay, here's the money, off you go. And the father just sits back and starts fattening up the calf, right?
He'll be back, right?
He knows that if that relationship is still there, and if the son goes out thinking like, oh, okay, my father thinks I'm an adult, he thinks I'm a big man, he thinks I can handle myself and make my own decisions, then when it falls apart, the son he can't say, oh, well, this is all my father. It's because he rejected me and he was distant and he was blah, 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 blah. He has to say, oh, no, this is because I made some really stupid decisions back there. And then it becomes possible to make that return. Now, I mean, in practical terms, that's very, very difficult to do. But you have to understand, like, if a kid is coming out of the closet, this isn't, if they come to you and say, I'm kind of having these feelings, I'm really confused, I don't know what to do, then there's a completely different approach. But if they're saying, Mom, Dad, I think you should know I'm gay, they've thought about that probably for years before they've come to you and made that declaration. And what they're doing is they're saying, I want my psychological inheritance. I am declaring myself as an adult. And it's almost a rite of passage where you're saying, I am now in control of my life, and this is what I'm going to do with it, and you're going to accept me, or I'm going to reject you. And that's obviously tremendously difficult. And I think, one of the main groups of people who write to me are people who say, my son or my daughter's come out of the closet, I don't know what to do, I'm really upset, and then my job is to sort of say, it's okay, calm down, it's not the end of their life, it'll be all right. But to sort of, to have that faith like St. Monica had, and to realize that, for some people, the path to sanctity is through whatever, right? Like, St. Paul could never have been St. Paul without first being Saul of Tarsus.
Right.
And
he had the thorn in the flesh, whatever that was, right?
Whatever that was. St. Augustine could never have been St. Augustine without, being a Manichae and having a mistress and whatever. I think Benedict Rochelle has a wonderful book, Stumbling Blocks, Stepping Stones, where he talks about the role that sins play in a person's spiritual life. And that it's not just you've fallen and therefore you're bad, it's also that through that experience of sin and redemption, you can get to sanctity.
Right.
And I think to keep that in mind and sort of try to have that kind of long vision perspective is tremendously helpful, because otherwise you just end up sort of butting heads and having tremendous conflict within the family.
Right.
That I think, if anything, makes it harder for that reconciliation to take place.
Okay, how about how can a homosexual person realistically live the Church's teaching on sexuality? Well,
I think David Morrison, who wrote Beyond Gay, and who he sort of also left the homosexual world in order to convert to Catholicism, says chastity is a long haul virtue. And a friend of mine once said, I've realized it may take me 20 years to overcome this. I'm committed for that 20 years. And I think and as it turns out, most of the time, if you say, I'm committed to doing this for as long as it takes, and I'm reconciled to the fact that this may be the rest of my life, more often than not, the end is going to come a lot sooner than you think it is. Whereas if you think, I'm never going to do this again, I'm never going to experience this again, this is over tomorrow, I've confessed this for the last time and it's done, then you're going to end up with a sort of self-feeding cycle of self-hatred and despair, because most people can't do that wholly all in one go thing. So I think having a realistic attitude, if you're fighting a war, you hope to win every battle.
Right.
But you plan to lose a few, and you make provisions for that, because otherwise you're gonna lose the whole thing. So I think that having that sort of a realistic view, and also make sure that you have strong friendships with people who know what you're going through and who are supportive, and who if you try to keep this inside and do it all by yourself, that's where you're very likely to just not be able to handle it and not be able to do it.
How about counseling? Does that factor in?
It would depend on the person. I personally, I find the sort of the counseling ethos sufficiently aesthetically repugnant that it would never work for me. But there are people for whom that has worked. Finding a spiritual director who you can really relate to is a good thing. It's going to be different for different people. But I think having that outside support, and also having humility, and to recognize that it's not the end of the world if you fail.
Right.
As long as there's that I'm going to get up and I'm going to persevere again.
Right.
Mentality.
Well, how about you're right. You get asked a lot of times in your talks if you leave this identity, the lifestyle to pursue God, how likely is it that you'll end up being able to get married, have kids, and live in that way?
It really depends on, what the causes are for homosexuality in your particular case. It depends, I think, to a certain extent on how dead set you have your heart on that. Ironically, the people who are really like, I'm going to change my sexual orientation and I'm going to get married, usually don't. The people who are like, I'm probably never going to have a sexual relationship again. I can't imagine myself with a man. I'm okay with that. Then, God broadsides you and you fall in love.
And your husband sweeps you off your feet, right?
Well, I don't know. My husband's not a sweep off the feet kind. But, but yeah, like he more argued me into it, which which works with someone like me. Yeah. But no, I mean I think I've seen this as well with young Catholics who are straight. If you have marriage set up almost as an idol,
right.
Very often you can't ever attain it. Whereas if you have that, I'm going to do God's will, and if God's will turns out to be this, that's fine. If it turns out to be that, that's fine. Then I think there's a higher likelihood. For some people, it won't happen, but you have to understand that. Well, I mean, you're a priest, right? So you know that there's happiness in the world without marriage. And very often you're surprised by, you think you want one thing for yourself.
Right.
You say, all right, God, this is your show. You tell me what to do because I don't know. And then what you get is actually a lot better than...
More fulfilling, right?
Than you would have imagined. Whatever you thought you wanted to do or be with your life.
Right. Well, we got to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment with Melinda Selmys. Hi, welcome back to Life on the Rock. Tonight our guest is Melinda Selmys, and I'd like to speak about the morality of homosexuality. Oftentimes, like Hollywood, you'll hear some spokesman or something say, well, two people love each other. What's wrong with that?
Okay, well, I think that in order to attack the whole question of the morality of this, you have to understand that Catholic sexual morality is a one-piece garment, and you can't sort of take and choose this piece, this piece, this piece. It was something I was working on an article when I was still, identifying as lesbian, and I was going to lambast the local Catholic school board for refusing to let PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays,
and I bet you could do that.
Come and talk to their students. So I said, okay, well, I'd better get the opposition's arguments so that I can really thoroughly refute them. So I phoned the school board and I said, why are you not allowing this group to come in and speak? And the person at the school board was like, oh, I don't know, I'll send you something. So they sent me the Pontifical Council for the Family's Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, which I read cover to cover. And I got to the end of it and I said, okay, I don't agree with this view of sexuality, but it's coherent, it's logical, it's internally it makes sense. And if I believed in a God who had created the universe and who had a very specific order for things, then I would see this as a very rational way of looking at sexuality. I don't. I'm an atheist, so this isn't for me. But I can, I was a good enough liberal that I could see that people who disagreed with me had a right to their beliefs as well. So, so basically, that was where I came to, was that you couldn't remove the prohibition on homosexuality from the Catholic Church's understanding of sexuality and still have something that was rational, coherent, and made sense. And I think, I mean, you have to also understand that it's not the love between two people that is being condemned. It's a certain way of expressing love between two members of the same sex. And, it's saying that, yeah, you can have a really intense emotional friendship for this person, but this is not the proper place for sexuality. And the reason for that is that, the church's sexual teaching is basically surrounding something that the church considers to be holy. It's not something that the church is afraid of. It's not something that the church hates, though we have had a couple of saints in the past, thinking of Jerome specifically, who might have crossed that line from time to time. But the multiplication of sort of rules or restrictions around something isn't because, this is a horrible force that if it gets loose in the world, it's going to do all sorts of damage. We have more rules and regulations surrounding the Eucharist than we do around any other thing because it is the most holy thing. And sex, because it is, it's the means by which new life comes into the world. It's an absolutely incredibly powerful thing, and I mean, C.S. Lewis, I believe, called it the pagan sacrament. So because there's that recognition that this is something that God made and that is holy, and that is, some of the documents of theology of the body and such treat it as, as an image of, not just the union between Christ and his church, but also of the intimate life of the Trinity. We're talking about something that, from a Catholic perspective, is extremely, extremely important, and therefore there's a lot of guidelines for how can we prevent this from getting out of hand, how can we prevent this from becoming a replacement for God or an idol. And so part of that, is there's the idea that it has to be a permanent union, right? That this is not something that you just play around with. It's not dissolvable. It has to, so divorce and those sorts of things are out. And also that it has to be something that is life-giving, that the responsible love between the couple is then continued in the responsibility of bearing children. And in practical terms, you can see this. You start off, you've got your honeymoon, and the sort of period of sort of just ecstatically enjoying one another comes to an end when you have your first child, and suddenly it's like, oh, okay, this actually has real consequences in the real world. And well, they're putting up a picture of me with one of my babies. And so it becomes something that is, the sort of the sacrificial dimensions of sexuality start to come into play and to be recognized, as opposed to just this sort of idyllic, sort of Disney fantasy type of love.
I think that brings out a great point to, in a way that we've failed in our heterosexual marriages to shine forth, to radiate this image of love to the world. So it's hard, and it's hard for us today to make the argument against like gay marriage or why homosexuality is wrong. Well,
I think, the scandal of contraception, the scandal of divorce, the scandal of premarital sex, the scandal of abortion, and especially the fact that these things are practiced so widely within the Catholic Church itself is probably the number one thing that makes it very, very difficult to reach out to the gay community or to have any kind of effective witness, because obviously what people say is, well, marriage doesn't seem to have anything to do with having to have children. Marriage doesn't seem to have anything to do with an indissoluble union. So, why, if you're straight, anything goes, but if you have attractions for your own sex, oh, well, then you're bad. And there's a tremendous number of people in the gay community who are scandalized in that way.
Right. I know in your writing, you write beautifully about the challenge of marital love and how the complementary differences, right, can really lift the other person up or call them to a higher plane?
Well, I think G.K. Chesterton has all sorts of really wonderful images for marriage, where he talks about, like, taking a chain and tying together two mountains, and and this sort of this epic, almost hero quest type of imagery, which I think reflects something that's very true about it. It's not just, in the fairy tale, you have all sorts of obstacles that you need to overcome, and then at the end you live happily ever after. And that's not what marriage is like at all. I know there was one of the saints, it had this, I don't remember where I got this story from, but there was a room full of crosses, and Jesus said, well, which one would you like? And she said, oh, give me the biggest one. He said, oh, no, that's for married people. And, that element of sacrifice and of coming to sort of expand yourself to the point where you can live in intimate love with someone who's really the complete opposite of you in a lot of ways, is, I think, a huge part of what marriage is about. And it's because of the whole image of it being an image of Christ's union with humanity. God versus man is a huge polarity difference. And so we're called to sort of try to imitate that in a smaller way. Man versus woman is not quite as big a gap, but it's still, it's calling you outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
And I think a lot of what attracts people to a same-sex relationship is that it's very comfortable.
Right.
It's very easy to talk to this person. It's very easy to relate to this person because you're on the same page, because you have the same basic experiences. Whereas as soon as you get married, it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're speaking a completely different language, and you don't seem to understand me either. But there's a tremendous amount of growth just in terms of how you understand humanity, how you understand yourself, and how you understand what it means to be compassionate. That happens when you...
Now, we just have a couple minutes left. Can you talk about reaching out to people in the gay lifestyle?
The biggest obstacle, I think, is failure to meet people on their level or where they are. A lot of the time I'll be at a party with a bunch of Catholic friends, and this issue will come up, and there's someone there who's obviously gay. And they'll be in an argument, and the first thing that they do is they whip out the natural law arguments. And I sit there and I go, oh gosh, this isn't going to work. No one has ever abandoned the central relationship in their life for a natural law argument. It's never going to happen. You have to be aware of the other person as a person and as a complete human being. So that means having relationships as opposed to just arguments or confrontations. You're probably not going to have a very effective outreach with someone if the only thing that you ever discuss is what you think about their sexuality. And also to be aware that you're talking about something that is very, very intimate and very, very personal. And you can't, you can say hate the sin, love the sinner all you want, only don't, because it offends people. But if you show that, if you actually demonstrate in a practical sense, I really love you, even though I don't accept what you do, then that has a profound impact. That's something I found with Catholic friends, is that they said, oh, yes, I really love you. I don't approve of what you're doing. And now, let's go for a walk in the woods and sing some songs and get a pizza. And that realization that these people are comfortable with me, these people love and affirm everything that is really a part of me. These people don't expect me to go and completely change my personality. That allowed me to really question, is this an innate part of my personality? And is it possible for someone to love me without loving this?
Well, Right. That's a great note to end with. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we'll see you next week. I'll give you a quick blessing. My Heavenly Father shine His face upon you and give you His peace. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week.